Hello, YouTube. Today I want to do a bit of a discussion video. This was kind of brought up to me recently by somebody in the comment section of my last video. A viewer of the channel named Tacitus900. He said, he asked me this question. He wanted to know what I think of the idea of reading only classics. Uh, because in his words, life is too short to only read bad books. Now, the idea being that maybe you should only read classics, only read books that other people have deemed worth your time, because all other books are bad. Now, I felt like this was a little bit pointed. I couldn't help but imagine that it was a little bit pointed because in that video I mentioned a certain book called Dick Onslow that I wanted to read, a boy's adventure novel that I picked up at a antique trading show recently because I broke my book buying ban in order to buy this. So feel like he was talking a bit about this when he was saying bad books, because in that video, I threw some shade at this book, even though it's one that I had been looking for and wanted to read. So I wanted to expand upon that a little bit. I responded to his comment almost immediately, but I also wanted to make my thoughts into a video. Now, I think to understand this question, you have to wonder like what makes something a classic. How are classics chosen? And there's many different reasons why classics are chosen. Ones that are very obvious, ones that anybody could tell you that classics are chosen for having great meaning that is expressed clearly and well within a very small little area, or for having historical significance and influence. Like Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin might be a sudsy melodrama, but it will always be remembered as a classic because it's kind of inseparable from its historical context, and it will forever be known as a book that started the Civil War, according to Abraham Lincoln and several other people. A bit of an oversimplification of history, but it's impossible to not treat it as a classic just because of that, no matter what the quality may have been. Now, quality obviously does matter in the making of a classic. For example, Treasure Island. Treasure Island is a great book. Everybody considers it a classic of boys' adventure fiction. But I feel there can only be one Treasure Island. And that is to say that that book is considered a classic because, well, no one adventure novel is often considered a classic. I mean, almost that entire genre is made up of books that are not classics. None of them have that much meaning. None of them are meant to really stimulate more than your testosterone. They aren't really, they don't have much historical significance, cultural significance. They aren't that influential. I mean, there's plenty of minor classics. I'll get to that later. But as for capital C classics, Treasure Island is kind of one of the only ones. And in that way, it's a classic because it distills a certain genre to its apex form. And then it's put on the shelf with all the other classics as sort of representative of that one genre. So when somebody such as Tacitus900 asks me, why read books that aren't classics? I think about that. Like, I like adventure novels. There's plenty of adventure novels that are classics or minor classics, like uh, King Solomon's Mines or The Four Feathers or something. But in terms of like real classics, like books that are actually very good and not just like nice if you're into that kind of thing, Treasure Island is like where my adventure reading would basically stop if I was a self-conscious reader who only read what other people told me to read. And That's basically the big flaw in this. And the reason why I told him I like reading books that aren't classics is because there's a difference between what is a classic with a capital C, the kind of classics people talk about when they say classics, and personal classics. Now, what's part of my personal classical library is based on my viewpoint of the history of literature in development in the genres that I like to read, which is often like adventure, fantasy, science fiction, that kind of thing. So sometimes you just have to pick your own classics. There's plenty of books that are good. I mean, Dick Onslow is not a classic in the adventure genre at all. It's just one that I like to read. But, well, what about The Coral Island or something? That's also hardly a classic. It is influential and somewhat significant. It was one of the most popular boys' adventure novels of that time. And Robert Louis Stevenson mentioned R.M. Ballantyne, the author of The Coral Island, along with W.H.G. Kingston in his preface to the reader in Treasure Island. So perhaps he considered those books classics. Or did he? I mean, he's just citing them as examples of books that boys love. I, they were his personal classics. That's all I could take from that. And maybe they're not our classics, but they're his classics in a way. I mean, like what's significant to me and my personal development might not be the same as somebody else's. Like, there's so many people out there who idolize the Phantom of the Opera or Wicked or I don't know why I'm picking on the theater kids, but there's there's some things that are classics to people because they're a rallying cry for who they were, their friends, their community, and it isn't always about the book itself. So that's one way that a classic cannot be a classic. Riddle me this, Batman. Now, many other classics are just books that have wide appeal, like H.G. Wells. Sometimes sometimes I pick on H.G. Wells. Sometimes I even make a joke of saying that his name isn't Herbert George Wells. It's actually Halfway Good Wells, and that's probably a complete misrepresentation. But the point I'm trying to make is that there's so many people who are smarter than H.G. Wells. Like H.G. Wells, I don't remember all the proper names, but he once wrote this paper called like this essay or something where he was predicting the future as he often does. And he was saying, in the future, there will be a time when a prophet comes who will tell humanity, who will show humanity the future, some kind of baron of industry or some kind of scientist or somebody who will push technology and society and culture forward. And then G.K. Chesterton came back at him with a much better take, I think, which is that people who are people who are like these prophets that H.G. Wells sort of painted a picture of, they keep coming and going throughout history, trying to tell people where the future is going, but people don't like having their fate determined for them. So when they see these kind of figures, they often react by trying to push in the opposite direction in what he called a constant, perpetual game of trying to cheat the prophet at his own game. And now that's an example of an author who's considered the author of many classics being bested by somebody else who's much smarter than he is, in in my opinion, who is the author of books that often people would consider minor classics. Like G.K. Chesterton, he wrote The Man Who Would Be Thursday. That's a classic. I'm sorry. I don't like coughing during videos, but that was in my throat for the past minute, so I'm sorry about that. But where was I? Okay, yeah, the Father Brown stories. That's something else G.K. Chesterton wrote. But George Wells is often propped up as like the smart guy, the smart boy who wrote that book that was the book The War of the Worlds, which actually is really cool. It's like it's a take on the invasion genre. It's like anti-imperialism. It's got a clever twist and everything. But if we're talking about classics as books that are these earth-shattering revelations, then really there's so much better stuff out there. And the point I'm trying to make is that sometimes a classic is considered a classic just because it has wide appeal. Like it hits a certain point where the author is smart, he makes his point clearly, but he's only smart enough that like most people can understand him. If he's too smart, then like nobody would understand him. If he's too stupid, of course, then everybody will understand him again. But sometimes the classic books that are widely considered classics are kind of stuck in that middle ground where not a lot of where most people understand them, not a lot of people oppose them. There's much better stuff out there, but it's not being seen as much, you know. And that's the point I'm trying to make is that not all classics deserve the title, perhaps. In fact, personally, there's been a bunch of books I've read that people hold up as being these major classics, and like I just have no interest in them whatsoever. And it starts to make me look down on these people, or even the attribution of classic to a book. Kind of seems like it's all hype sometimes. Like, I'm not going to name any authors because I don't really feel like I can defend my opinions here. I haven't read enough of anybody to really buck the popular opinion, I think. But some of these authors, it's gotten to the point where when somebody considers something a classic, then I'm almost like, I feel like I'm not going to like it, and I want to stick to this instead. But that's just another big problem that I have with classics. So basically, the point is, people don't always know what their personal classics may really be, until you find out about them yourself. And there's been so many books I've read. Just, I just love the feeling of exploring new books, plunging the depths of semi classic, minor classic, not really classic at all literature that just seeing what I find because I've actually found some real gems this way. Books that are not just personal classics to me, but I feel like could be classics to other people, but literally nobody talks about them. And they might have only a few reviews on Goodreads or something like that, or nobody actually realizes how influential this book may be on like one specific author. There's a number of books like that, especially The Three Mulla by Walter de la Mare. It's like this amazing proto fantasy work that like literally nobody talks about. That's a very very obvious influence on The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. Came prefigured it like in many ways. Came out like 17 years before. It's actually a super amazing book, and I would love to recommend that to people. I'd recommend it to people who are fans of The Hobbit. But I'm going to talk about that at great length at some other time, I'm sure. The point is, I've the point is not restricting myself to the classics has allowed me to find all these new gems, and now I can share them with you. You might not know about them otherwise, but now we can share these books with each other that we have found because we strayed away from what people just told us to read. And sometimes people who only read classics, I think they only read them because they want to be part of some discussion, which is fine, but books are a very intimate activity. So I feel like if you pick books because you want to just participate in some larger discussion, you're missing something. Because books, your bookshelf should be an extension of yourself. And if I have all these weird, esoteric, esoteric stuff on there that nobody's ever heard of, then in a way that just shows off who I am as an individual. All right. I think that I have made my point here. Let me check my outline to see if I missed anything. Ah, I see. So just read what you want. That's basically what I wanted to end my video on. Thank you guys. See you later. Bye.